It's time for How to Grow It with Keith Funk, garden expert, author, radio and TV garden show host. Keith and his guest garden pros are here to help you with all your lawn and garden questions. You'll have the best yard in town thanks to How to Grow It with the pros.
It's time for another episode of How to Grow It with the Pros. Hi, I'm your host, Keith Funk, and today's lawn care question was emailed in by Jody, a listener from Sacramento, California. She wants to know why in her lawn, as she's watering, she sees water running into the street and on her sidewalk after just a few minutes. That seems wrong. Obviously, the water is not soaking in. Well, Jody, it's your lucky day because joining me today in the studio is the top guy from Revive, John Eden. And together we're going to dig into this problem and come up with some solutions. Welcome, John. Thanks for coming to the studio.
You bet, Keith. Glad to be here.
Now, before we start answering Jody's questions, I see several issues here. There's clay soil, there's compaction, there's fertilizer, there's getting water into the soil, aeration, and so forth. All of these things have a direct correlation to Revive. Now, can you tell our listeners who and what Revive is and what it does?
Sure. Revive's been around for a long time. I would say over 30 years helping homeowners with these kinds of issues. We do a lot of trade shows, and I hear from many homeowners that come to our booth that talk about this kind of a problem specifically. So Revive has got several ingredients, and one of those happens to be a strong surfactant to help get water through those clay soils, or if they have a slope, the water can't be received as much or as quickly as it would need to be. Mm-hmm. And the surfactants in Revive can help with that problem.
Now, what is a surfactant?
Well, it's a fancy word for a wetting agent. So it makes water wetter, allowing that water to penetrate through thick thatch, thick mat, heavy clay soils, or just compacted areas.
Okay. And what else does Revive have in it? I know it has more than surfactant.
Oh, yes. That's just one of the ingredients. There's organic matter in there, and that's important for building your soil, feeding your soil. If you feed the soil, you feed the plant, just kind of a roundabout way of doing it. We also put iron in it, and iron does basically one thing, and that's make the lawns dark green. And most people like that.
The other cool thing about your product is it's all natural and organic as well.
Correct. And we do have a liquid and a dry formulation for homeowners who want that option.
Well, how would you determine which one to use?
It comes down to ease of use for most homeowners. If they have a small patch, a small strip of sidewalk areas that they want to treat the grass next to, the hose and applicator is perfect for that. If it's a large yard, I recommend the granules. And the extra benefit from the granules is we make it with dehydrated chicken manure.
And why is that a benefit?
It's a great organic fertilizer.
Oh, okay. So nice slow release nitrogen.
Exactly. Low burn potential too.
Well, that's great. Well, let's jump into Jody's question here, John. The first thing I wanted to talk about was clay soil. And out there in Sacramento, I know they do have pockets of clay soil. And clay is just naturally slow to accept water because the pore size is so small. It doesn't let water in. And that's exactly where your wetting agents or your surfactant comes in handy, right?
Correct.
So you just hook up the hose with the ready-to-spray version and just hose the yard down and then water it in?
That's all there is to it. Water it in. You'll have results usually showing up in about 7 to 10 days.
And what does that mean as far as to the root system?
Well, roots don't grow in dry soil, Keith, so if you can push water, air, nutrients down deeper, you'll have a deeper, healthier root system that can withstand drought, can go longer between waterings. All of that's saving money to you as a homeowner.
Well, and combined with the clay soil, a lot of times compaction is a real issue, like you mentioned on slopes or areas along driveways and sidewalks where you get a lot of foot traffic. People get off the path and onto your grass and sort of beat your soil down.
Yes. Anytime you get to foot traffic, pet traffic, and you sometimes, for those of us with pets, you'll see that maybe a pattern around the edges of the fence where they're barking. And
Revive is an excellent product to help get the water into those areas.
Definitely. I have a 90-pound golden retriever that creates those same problems in my yard. So if I take my hose and applicator, maybe give it an extra heavy drench, follow with some water, I get recovery very quickly there.
And so obviously it's pet friendly. It's not always a good time to do mechanical aerating during the hot part of the year. Most times you want to do your mechanical aerating where you pull the plugs out of the ground. That's done in the spring and the fall when it's cool and you're not going to lose a lot of water once you plug the holes into the ground. So during the hot part of the year, I would assume that Revive is going to be a great liquid aerator.
You know, Keith, I have seen some yards so hard and compacted that the machine actually bounces across the lawn. It'd be amazing to see that happen, but it does. So Revive is a great option for those people with compacted soils where aeration perhaps isn't appropriate, maybe a steep slope where it's maybe unsafe to have a machine. Revive does a great job in those situations.
So we've talked about clay soils and compaction. We've talked about surfactants, wetting agents, and aeration. And finally, the last thing I'd like to talk about really quick, because you mentioned the dry granules having a fertilizer in them as well. Once you get the clay soils and compaction and the water into the soil, get those problems resolved, one of the best ways to get your grass to recover is to fertilize.
Yes. And Revive, the granules have a little bit of organic fertilizer to help boost that nutrient value in the soil and get those grass plants back on the right track.
Now, real quick, when you're using the liquid Revive on the sloping areas or the compacted areas, how often do they need to reapply that?
You know, that can vary from one site to the next. Generally speaking, most applications will last about 6 weeks, again, depending upon how much they water and their soil type. But if they're dealing with some, what I call an acute problem, where it's the grass is crispy, the ground is very compacted, you might see those homeowners applying every 4 weeks until they get the problem corrected.
Well, especially in Jody's case, if she uses the Revive and she starts to see runoff a few weeks later, she can reapply it again as needed.
You bet.
All
definitely.
Right. So you've been listening to How to Grow It with the Pros. I'm your host, Keith Funk, and today joining me in the studio was John Eden. John, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure, Keith, for being here. And just like Jody had mentioned with her problems, we have many other customers that Revive can solve their problems. They go to our website, revive.com. They can see and learn a lot more, including how to have the greenest lawn on their block.
And, I think the coolest thing about Revive is that it's not just for lawns. It's for your flower beds.
People use it in so many places. We hear from so many homeowners at these trade shows. We have a homeowner in Grand Junction, Colorado with no turf, but she uses the Revive granules in all of her whiskey barrels, her planters. You should see her perennials. She loves it.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, John. And I'd like to thank you, everybody that's listening. Thank you for listening today.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of How to Grow It with garden expert Keith Funk. Get all your lawn and garden questions answered listening to Keith and his Garden Pro guests. You'll have the best yard in town thanks to How to Grow It with the Pros.